I'm going to defer the regulatory approvals hurdles to the rest of the group. But it's been a wild ride inside of crypto. Again, I've talked to an investor yesterday, one of the biggest closed-end fund investors. They do a lot of like arbitraging price to NAV, similar to the GBTC phenomenon. This is not even on his radar. They don't. Many people don't really know that this is coming. We saw the gaffe yesterday with the SEC. It popped up on the news channels quickly. I think Bloomberg has been, laser-eyed on it, but it was on CNBC, but it quickly faded and they moved on. So I think that we're all super excited. I think that we've heard that money's lining up. Um, I'm I'm excited to observe that no one else is talking about it. That that's bullish, in short.
Matt from VanEck, I see you're on there. I know there's probably not a whole lot you can tell us just quite yet, but what are you thinking of and looking at today? Is everything still running as planned, despite kind of that little hiccup we saw with the SEC tweet yesterday? Are things still kind of all on track from your end of things?
Hey everybody. Yeah, no change. We're hoping to launch these products along with everyone else for trading tomorrow. You may have seen those acceleration orders earlier this morning. Like the listing exchanges, the CBOs and the NASDAQs, they wouldn't request those accelerations unless the SEC specifically told them to. And there's only one reason the SEC would tell them to do that. So still feeling pretty positive about tomorrow.
Can you walk us through a little bit exactly what that request for certification was, what that means?
It's just another piece of the bureaucratic paper pushing to get these products ready to be traded. Normal process.
Okay, so would that, from what you're seeing, would you still expect that could lead to trading starting as early as tomorrow, or is there kind of another timeline that could emerge?
That's the timeline. Looks like tomorrow for trading, this afternoon
Okay.
for approvals. That's what we're hopeful for.
Okay, great. I also wanted to welcome Sui Chung from CF Benchmarks. What are you seeing on your end of things, especially from like a technical level? Is it all systems go?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, all systems go as far as we can see. A few sort of last minute connectivity issues, testing, resiliency testing, setting up backups, all that good stuff, all the things that you would expect to be doing when you have an ETF launch imminent.
That's a very good point about the contingencies and the backups. This morning, Market Vectors, which is our index subsidiary that competes with CF, launched a new Satoshi index, which is call it like a backup benchmark for our BBR index, which is the index that we're using to benchmark prices for this ETF. And the Satoshi index will just price once a day at the 4 p.m. Eastern close, and that will make it a handy and definitive backup in case there's some type of strange volatility in those last minutes of the New York trading day.
Okay. I also wanted to welcome James Seyfarth from Bloomberg Intelligence. I see he's online. You want to bring us up to speed from your end? I know you're probably watching this as close as anyone.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I have like a billion different things going on at the moment. That said, I missed the beginning of what anyone said, but we're just waiting for. I'm still waiting for those 19B4s and S1s, and like Matt hinted at, we're expecting that after market close today. But that said, we've seen a bunch of these requests for accelerations, which is something that needs to happen for many of these issuers if they want to trade tomorrow. And the only reason you would request for acceleration here is because the SEC told you to. That's not something you're just going to do out of nowhere. So they're requesting for that for a very specific reason.
Okay, and James, I wanted to ask where you expect to see this emerge first. Is this the 19B4 forms? I've seen some talk that the S1s might go effective at the same time. Is there any kind of order that you're expecting to see this all progress in?
I don't know if there's a set order that it needs to occur in. I do know that you need both the S1 to go effective and the 19B4 orders to be approved to list. And I'm expecting both of those things to happen today. So once you see those 19B4 orders get approved, I think that's pretty much de facto that it is approved. Whether or not they begin trading tomorrow, I guess that's still up in the air. But again, we're expecting that to happen. But once you see those 19B4 orders on the SEC website, which I went to yesterday, right when I saw the SEC tweet, and the website wasn't working, so I couldn't confirm it, and I never saw them on there, obviously, because they never dropped. But yeah, once those 19B4s are dropped, that's when I consider these things to be approved, and largely just because, one, that's needed, and two, that's what everyone's been watching and looking out for this entire time. That's the key hurdle here.
So there's no reason to expect something odd that would happen, like the 19B4s would be approved, but the S1s wouldn't go effective. This is all kind of, I know they're different processes, but it's kind of all expected to go hand in hand.
In my view, they go hand in hand. That said, if the S1 doesn't go effective, that might just mean that these things don't list and trade tomorrow, potentially, for whatever reason. But I don't. That just means that maybe there's a gap between these two approvals. But once the 19B4 order is given the AOK, that's when I consider these things to be approved.
Okay, so that's the big one that we should all be watching for, that we all are watching for. Eleanor, I know I see you online as well. Speaking of that tweet from the SEC yesterday, what kind of fallout are you hearing about that, or speaking to anyone about? What are people telling you?
Well, there's a lot of embarrassment, naturally, coming from former employees, current employees at the SEC. My sources are saying that people are just kind of like, what on earth happened? I think they're trying to figure it out themselves. I don't know if we're ever going to know exactly what happened. I know, obviously, Twitter's support did a little investigation, and it turned out that two-factor authentication was not turned on, and all that. Someone with the number associated with the account was able to access it. But I mean, the whole thing is you can see it from a lot of different angles. I mean, I know there's people saying that it was an inside job, and then there's people saying it was possibly a malicious hack from North Korea. There's a lot of theories out there. But I think the interesting one is that I feel like it's not really being touched on as much, is that the person with the access to the account was on there for the SEC said about 15 minutes, right? Because they posted at 4:11, and then they got off at 4. Or Gary Gensler tweeted, or the SEC regained control around like 4:30. So like those 15 minutes that the person had access to the account, was it really just 15 minutes? Because they had a good amount of time to create a graphic, if so, that was pretty similar to how the SEC's graphics have been in the past, the real ones. And then they were also tweeting like the handles, or the hashtags Bitcoin, and then they were liking a whole bunch of stuff. So the SEC is saying like it was just quick in and out. But in reality, was it really longer than that? And how long did these people have access, or this one person have access to the SEC's account? So I feel like there's definitely more to the story here. I don't know. I think they want to get probably the ETF approvals out of the way first, but we saw this morning, obviously, Congress is looking to step in. There's letters from the Senate already in Gary Gensler's inbox this morning demanding answers. I think we're probably going to see Senate Banking and House Financial Services haul eventually Gensler up, but at least make inquiries, maybe do staff interviews to try and get to the bottom of this, because this really is unprecedented. It's not the SEC being hacked. That's happened before. The SEC has actually been hacked, but I don't think we've ever seen the SEC's social media accounts be hacked and taken control of. So definitely an interesting time, a very interesting final 24 hours before these things possibly get approved. Although I know everybody was enjoying the memes, at least I was.
Yeah, I also want to bring in my colleague Sarah Wynn, who's been following some of the reaction in Congress, or potential reaction. What are you seeing there, Sarah?
Yeah, it's been interesting. And even too, as we're talking in about 15 minutes or so, House Financial Services Committee will be meeting. They met earlier this morning, but this one will be more crypto focused during a hearing. So I think this will be something that's brought up a bit more throughout that hearing. And so I wanted to ask even too, Eleanor, I mean, have you heard anything? I think we've seen a couple letters, if I've got that right, go out this morning, kind of demanding answers and from different lawmakers. How do you sort of see Congress sort of reacting to this? Is this something where they call in, SEC Chair Gary Gensler to come into a hearing and talk about this, or how do you see that sort of playing out?
I think they'll have to get Gary in at some point, but we know from watching former hearings that Gary likes to hide behind the line of, oh, I can't speak about that as that's currently being investigated, or it's a matter of SEC. It's already, I forget the terminology he uses, but you know what I mean. He says, I can't speak to things that are currently in litigation or already being investigated. So I think we're going to see an investigation, whether it's SEC investigating itself, which is kind of funny for either, obviously for cybersecurity risks. I think there's so much to unpack here because the funny part is the SEC actually passed new cybersecurity rules this summer, which said that they need to make, or public companies need to make extensive disclosures when they have a hack and need to make extensive disclosures about what they do internally to prevent hacks of this nature. And then this happens. So, you could see the SEC investigating itself for cybersecurity risks, market manipulation. I don't know. I'll have to kind of wait and see which purview that falls under. Would it be the CFTC because Bitcoin's a commodity? Would it be the SEC investigating itself? Then you also have the Office of the Inspector General, which is a separate office to the SEC, who oversees the SEC in terms of matters, the internal matters at the SEC. So you saw this report back in 2022. I think probably you guys remember it. It was from the former Inspector General. It was kind of a scathing report about how Gary Gensler runs the SEC. They said they were investigating the rulemaking practices. So, I wouldn't be surprised if they add this to their list of what they're looking into at the SEC. So that, from an internal standpoint and from an SEC standpoint, that's kind of what I'm expecting. And then from a congressional standpoint, probably getting Gary up on the Hill. I just don't know how much he would be able to say about it or how much he would say. I did reach out to a couple of my Hill sources today just saying, are you guys even rumbling about possibly having hearings on this thing? And the consensus I got back was nothing to share at the moment, but we'll keep you posted. So I think there's definitely momentum there. Like, people want to do it. Obviously, lawmakers are not very happy. So probably expect something within the next couple weeks to months.
I also wanted to welcome Steve McClurg from Valkyrie, Scott Johnson from Van Buren Capital. I think we have Matt Kunkan now from GSR. So we have a full group of people. Maybe, Scott, I know you've been following this very, very closely on Twitter. And where are you at? What are you thinking of right now? Are you still expecting this today, this evening? Why do you think everyone is so focused on like this 4 to 6 p.m. window? What are you kind of thinking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as likely as I've ever been that these are going to be approved. I mean, I've been in the camp for a long time. Between 4 to 6 p.m., I think that's kind of the sweet spot. It's going to be after market hours. Normal business hours, I think, go to like 5:30 at the SEC. So if I had to narrow it down even more, I'd say, between 4 and 5:30. I think that's when Edgar closes as well, or at least the normal operating hours. So I think if I had to do an order of operations here, what you probably end up seeing is, shortly after 4. I don't know if there'll be an actual announcement at the SEC, especially given yesterday's events, or if they just start uploading 19B4 orders up to the SRO section of the SEC website, which would be the likely approval orders. And then after that is uploaded for those applications, then you would probably end up seeing what is like a notice of effectiveness filed Edgar, which would be with respect to the registration statements, and that would be kind of the final secondary hurdle that would allow these issuers to trade the securities tomorrow. I think the interesting thing today, so far at least, in terms of events, is the CBOE. At least I don't think there has been another exchange yet, but they filed what was a request for acceleration. This was under the 34 Act. What you won't see, because it's a non-public filing, and I won't ask the actual issuers on this spaces because they probably won't tell me anyways. But what you're probably not seeing is that there's some non-public filings that are probably happening, which are also requests for acceleration from the issuers that are to the SEC, which are essentially the pre-step before the SEC would file their notice of effectiveness in response to those requests. So my guess is that's happening behind the scenes, which would just be a normal part of the process if the plan is to actually trade tomorrow.
Steve, what can you tell us from your end of things? Is everything all systems go for you?
Well, I don't really know anything. I'm actually here to troll Ellie and James because they seem to know what I'm having for breakfast before I do. But no, everything is all systems go. As far as we know, and by the way, we truly don't know anything either. I wasn't being facetious. We have our indications, we have our assumptions, but if I had a wager on it, I'd say launches tomorrow, approvals tonight. But anything could happen. So I don't think anybody really knows the timing. It's going to be the timing is going to be when the SEC says it is. So, but I do have high expectations that things are going tonight. I think everybody's just doing tests, making sure that everything's set up correctly, cybersecurity is in place. That's probably the biggest thing right now is cybersecurity. We're making sure that every single person on their team has 2FA. I mean, things that we've done long ago, but just going through, making sure that we're double, triple checked, that we have no holes, and moving forward.
Matt, from GSR, I know we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but especially with that false tweet that we saw and some of the price movement, I know you didn't want, there's only so much you can predict, but what are you reading from the market in terms of what that showed us and what we might see if this is approved? I mean, is this a buy the news? Is this a sell the news? What kind of, where do you expect to see this go?
Yeah, overall, I mean, I'm still slightly biased higher. I do think I was slightly surprised by. I think if the approval came, I would have expected a larger move than we actually saw yesterday. Obviously, yesterday was a little bit weird with the fake approval and that being noticed pretty quickly thereafter. I'd say the other really interesting thing, and the thing that stood out by far the most today, has really just been, if this is approved, which everyone I think really expects, it's now in the rear view mirror, and everyone kind of moves on to something else. And I think that like the natural catalyst you've seen today is like ETH is the next one. ETH's ETF deadline would be in May, and you've really just seen that in market prices today, like the massive outperformance of ETH, all ETH ecosystem, L2s, the rocket pools, the Lidos, so on and so forth. So I think that's been like a next man up, next catalyst up has been the theme of today.
Wanted to open it up and just talk about flows, and we've seen all kinds of figures. One as high as expecting 100 billion into the sector this year. What does everyone think is a likely number, and how much of this is going to be kind of just an initial boost versus kind of a long-term sustained thing? If whoever is wants to talk, feel free to jump in. James, maybe you might have an opinion.
What was the question on where the prices are going to go?
Just like what kind of flows you're expecting to see once this gets approved. We've seen figures as high as 100 billion in 2024.
Yeah, that number is way too high as far as I'm concerned. We're thinking more like 10 to 15 range is our guess on flows that could potentially happen. There's no way to know. I mean, what we're really watching is going to see what happens over the next couple days. we think there's a lot of these issuers. I mean, I'm sure Steve probably can't talk to this yet, and Matt probably can't, but they probably have some clients lined up that are going to be putting money into this thing on day one. And we would be shocked if some of these other issuers don't. So a lot of this money is going to come in. Now the question is, how much of these flows in the near term are going to be net new buying of Bitcoin that have never had exposure versus shifting exposure from something like an international ETF up in Canada or some other private trust product or you name it. So we're expecting significant capital to be flowing in. It's just I have no way to determine whether that's net new buying of Bitcoin or it's just shifting around your allocations. So we'll be trying to suss out that information by looking at what's publicly available. And you can kind of see who's trading these things based on the size of the trades that are occurring. So on the terminal, we can look through these things and see how big these trades are versus how much of it is like a bunch of small little trades. So those are things I'll be looking at to try and suss these things out, but it's a lot of it tends to be a bit more art than science unless you're actually on the other end, which some of these people on the stage are. But yeah, you have to kind of figure out what's actually going on in the back end, but either way, it's going to be fascinating and fun to watch.
James, I
Yeah,
want to ask if you think the Bitcoin spot ETFs will be, and I believe I'm quoting you right. You said the Ethereum futures ETFs were an absolute flop. You think the Bitcoin spot will be a bit better than that?
Yeah, so I was never in the camp that the spot ETFs were going to be a flop. I did downplay my expectations for day 1-2 flows and volume. That said, with the stuff we've seen and heard over the last few weeks, I've kind of changed that. It could be a pretty big day. But again, I think what happens in the next few days isn't as critical. I'm more interested to see what happens over the next 12 to 18 months, if you will, because a lot of these platforms that are going to be the ones that will be the big users of these things probably won't let the people that work there actually buy them without some hoops and hurdles to jump through. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see which of these issuers are able to get on different platforms, and whether or not advisors really want this thing. Right? We do know there is a subset of advisors that like this space and want this asset class in their portfolios and their client portfolios, but it remains to be seen how big that group of clients is. And right now, once this happens, this is going to be the last real hurdle, in my opinion, before they can just kind of port this into their typical exposure.
And I just had a quick question
I'm just
too.
going to jump in with our flow estimates, which I detailed, I think, yesterday. But just for repetitive sake, we're at $2 billion for the first week in incremental money. That's feeling a little bit low given some of the news flow. We're at $40 billion over 1 to 2 years. All the issuers, it's in their filings yesterday and then today. The fees have all been trickling out, and the amendments to those fees encourage everyone to look at that. There's one issuer, the guy with the largest amount of assets right now, and I would just say from our inbound phone calls, that fee level remained maybe a little high on the stickier side, on the high side than maybe some prospects were expecting. So that would argue for more flows between products than we might have originally expected.
Hey, this is Tom. I have a operational question. So I know with closed-end funds, you can create units outside of trading hours, and that's oftentimes the reason for this premium and discount. What's going to happen with the ETF? Like, let's say someone has X amount million lined up pre-seed. Are those creation units going to happen right at the open? And they're going to have to go out and buy Bitcoin right at the open? Or can they do that prior to trading hours?
I think you may be confusing what is the definition of an actual seed. The seed amounts were all disclosed in filings. In the VanEck filing, you can see that we seeded it with 1,600 Bitcoin, 72.5 million of our own money. That is separate from any first day clients that we may or may not have signed. So there's been a lack of news. I think all the issuers are holding their cards on that, aside from that Bitwise news that we saw 200 million from Pantera. But otherwise, folks will be buying in the open market or trying to get APs to exchange.
Right. So whatever seed Bitcoin will just be priced at NAV, that day. There won't be
Yes.
any discrepancies of discount premium.
Right.
And I just had a quick question too. And I don't know, maybe if Matt, you want to chat about this, but is there any possibility, just given all the different people that are kind of in this field right now, all the different ETF issuers, is there any sense that there could be any volatility when it comes to the spot Bitcoin ETFs or the price of Bitcoin? And kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Volatility in the price of Bitcoin? Who would think of
On
such a
hurdles.
thing?
All right, I didn't know too if James, if you wanted to take that or Matt.
Yeah, I mean, the way to think about this is it's just like it will be like buying and trading Bitcoin itself, right? So any impact that any amount of trading that happens, particularly initially before they can build up their shares outstanding. So at some point, a lot of these will get to a level where the ETF shares will trade between themselves, almost similar if you're thinking about this from a centralized exchange perspective. Some of the Bitcoin doesn't necessarily move around on chain. It's just like trading back and forth within Gemini or Coinbase's own platform. That's what's going to happen with these ETF shares eventually once they get to a significant enough size. Until then, depending on what's going into flows, any money going in or out of these funds is just going to be just like trading spot Bitcoin itself. So theoretically, this is likely to drive up trading and drive up volatility, at least in the near term. Long term, I think these ETFs will actually decrease volatility in the underlying asset. But I actually have to hop right now. I have something at 2:00. But thanks for having me, everyone, and we'll talk soon. Fingers crossed, everyone.
Thanks for stopping by. Sweet. Over at CF Benchmarks, I know we specifically have talked in the past about gold ETFs and kind of where price discovery was occurring before and after ETFs, and it was quite a nuanced discussion. But I'm curious what you're thinking about in terms of that as and where the Bitcoin ETFs come into that. Do you think it could shift where price discovery might be happening?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nathan. I don't think we're going to see a shift in where it happens, because today price discovery is happening on a mixture of derivatives markets and spot markets. And if you conduct lead lag analysis or pairwise correlation type analysis, what you see is the price leadership or the lead sort of flips back and forth. Right now, recent history is it happens a bit more on the futures market, on the CME market, and then we'll flip back to the spot market. Obviously, when the CME market is closed and or less liquid outside of those core trading hours. So I don't think that it will gravitate necessarily to a different place. But one interesting thing that is watching the at what times is the market the most liquid, because right now the market for Bitcoin dollar is most liquid during the hours of about 3 till 5 p.m. London time, which in Eastern time is sort of 10 to 12 in the morning. Now, because all the ETFs will nav to benchmarks that will be calculated in the run up to 4 p.m. Eastern, and if you have a lot of create redeems, obviously that's when trading activity will occur. And so it would be interesting the interesting thing for I think from our perspective, and indeed for a lot of traders, will be whether that most liquid period shifts to the New York hours, because the New York sort of close hours are the second most liquid period, but that European close hour is today still the most liquid, and will the ETFs trigger that sort of shift of liquidity where you see more liquidity in those New York close hours?
Would that have any kind of broader impact on center of gravity in Bitcoin, if that's even a thing, or besides just kind of in the hours that we're talking about?
I don't think it really would move the center. I can't think the second order of effects and as you say, the movement of gravity, because that gravity, because of the distributed nature of market structure, is pretty loose, right, in the first place. And when I, I'm talking about averages, I'm talking about medians over long periods of time here. But so it's difficult to pin that down. But I think the timing. I mean, it'd be interesting to get the views of a friend from GSR. They're the traders. That it'd be interesting to hear how they think about what the potential impacts will be, and whether it will impact the way that they think about what they can do, how much they can get done at different times of the day.
Yeah, I'd note that I don't sit on our trading desk specifically, so I won't opine too much. I don't think it'll have a meaningful impact or a material impact on how we execute, but I should caveat that I'm not on our trading desk specifically.
Great. I wanted to talk a little bit about fees too, and Matt and Steve, you might be able to chime in on this. We've kind of seen, I don't know, should we be calling it a race to the bottom, or how low can we go? We're seeing 0.2%. How is anyone going to make money? Is this going to be profitable at these levels?
I would just I'd say that reporters and analysts should be careful about trying to measure the break-even profitability of these products. From our filing, you'll see that we put 72 million of our own money in here, so we're going to make money if the price goes up. These ETFs offer a considerably more affordable way to hold Bitcoin versus trying to deal with multiple exchanges and find liquidity in that way. The custodians have brought down their fees a lot, so we've got our own stack. We're going to make money from that. And sorry, one other thing is that the wirehouses have not yet put out their asset allocation models to include Bitcoin. So they're 60-40. There's no 1 or 2% in these models for Bitcoin yet. We know from engaging with these counterparties that they are building those models as we speak. Many will kind of come to market in the second half of this year, and then you'll have the second order effect where the balanced ETF will be a source of flows into the Bitcoin ETF, and we have that at VanEck with our own model portfolios that are a mix of equities, bonds, real assets, and those models have started to include Bitcoin, and they will get more aggressive once and if these ETFs go effective, and I think you'll see that occur across the street as well. Some of that may be a way that BlackRock sources their early flows into their own ETF is through like existing other BlackRock ETFs that are multi-asset.
Yeah, I agree there, and I also would add that anytime that people look at fees alone, it's kind of a sucker's game, and I would also caution people to say that, well, the lowest fees the better. When I used to be an esoteric bond manager, we'd always get beat up in fees by pension funds and insurance companies, and we'd say, look, if you want to save 10 basis points by going with a manager that has lower performance, go for it. We would typically in those cases outperform your plain vanilla managers by a few points. So 10 basis points is better in the long run.
Yeah, and Nathan, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all of the Spot Bitcoin ETF issuers, but as a crypto fund manager, this is going to be a flagship type crypto fund, and many of these fund managers will look at this as attracting new customers. So you really have to think about like the lifetime value of a customer rather than what the annual fee you're going to be pulling out of their brokerage account. Because if you think about just take the ETH ETF for example, everyone seems confident that that's coming. So when you are one of the winning Bitcoin asset managers, you're going to have a much easier time attracting capital into future crypto funds and
Hey,
other
Tom.
funds outside of that. So it's a branding play as well.
Hey, I just want to jump in here. We're getting notification now that the CBOE says that Bitcoin Spot ETF to start trading tomorrow. So that's coming from the CBOE.
See, that's why I troll Ellie. I mean, Ellie literally knows everything before everybody else does, and I love her for it.
It's my spidey senses.
I'm sure everyone will be at this moment looking for that. Tom, I wanted to follow up and say, like, as a fund manager, when you have so many of these different options, how do you choose? Even a retail investor who wants to buy one of these maybe tomorrow, how are you going to pick which one? There's so many options, and at the end of the day, it's a Bitcoin product, so it's not very differentiated other than the fee. How is a person going to decide which one if they want to invest in something?
That's a hard. It's case by case, right? I mean, as an advisor, you're likely going to look at some either brand name issuers that clients are familiar with, your team's familiar with. But then you have research, and this is a big. I mean, I can't tell you how much of a differentiator this was in Canada. Those asset managers who are able to educate, who are able to provide simple information, the elevator pitches about what this asset is, the ones doing webinars and roadshows. It's not just a loyalty thing, but it's a direct connection, and these advisors can't just drop and drag. They need a script. They need risk parameters. They need a valuation metric. And so what we've seen is some of those managers who have just thrown darts at industries to create these financial products have suffered. And so it's going to be, I think it's going to be a mixed bag of, certainly from the advisor standpoint, the brand recognition. No one's the old days. No one got fired for hiring IBM, and you may have some sort of lazy approaches to this. No one will get fired for hiring BlackRock. But I'll challenge that by saying, unless these managers are providing information, distribution, contacts, things that advisors need to make decisions, they're going to pick the asset managers who help them make those decisions.
100% agree, Tom. The way that folks are going to decide is by considering the commitment of the sponsors. So that's, we feel good that we're not tourists to Bitcoin. We've been advocating for this product for 7 years, educating the market, having breakfasts in our Midtown office, writing papers, research. We haven't badmouthed decentralized software like other issuers have done, BlackRock. We recognize that Bitcoin's a public good, so we're donating 5% of our profits to core developers. We're trying to position like at the intersection of both worlds, providing research to both worlds, and it's that's part marketing, but it's part reality, and we can see it with the phone calls lighting up here.
Yeah, and I wanted to, and maybe Eleanor, you might have some thoughts on this. We saw that news from SIBO just hit. They've listed their circulars saying that some funds are going to start trading tomorrow, but we still haven't seen those 19 BF4s, and I guess that's what everyone is still waiting for before we can say this has officially been approved. Correct? I think.
Sorry, just multitasking a little bit here. Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, I mean, this is obviously the exchange, the CBOE saying they have actually got a trading date, so they must have gotten that request approved for accelerated approval that they had requested this morning. I don't think they would put that on their website if they didn't. However, yes, I'm going to go with James and Eric's wisdom on this one, where, at least to be sure, to be 1,000% sure, we should probably just wait until the 19B4s are posted to the SEC's website. I wouldn't be surprised if those start trickling in after market. I mean, this is a great sign. I'm not saying this is like, another SEC incident, but definitely let's look for the 19B4s, possibly the S1s. But I mean, it says it right here. I'm about to tweet it out. First date of trading, Thursday, January 11th, 2024. So this is pretty black and white.
Well, we will look for that tweet. And finally, we're just wanted to open it up to any final closing thoughts. And like Tom, I know you had so much experience watching this from when these were launched in Canada. Have you ever seen such excitement? Does anyone think we'll ever see this much excitement about this again? And then the question is, where do we go from here? Is this discussion going to go to Ether or flows, or what are people going to be? What should we be talking about tomorrow?
Yeah,
Tom,
I'd like to chat.
Or she, please.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in, Nathan. Yeah, I think that we probably won't have the same degree of anticipation of any other crypto ETF launch, because this is just the first one, and it's always going to get the more attention. It will become, I think, a more commonplace occurrence going forward, or at least I hope so. And I think that what we move on to now is, we do want to see how the ETFs perform. A number of the panelists have made predictions, but let's see what actually happens. Which investor cohorts are come in with assets, and how will the narrative around Bitcoin change? Because I think it will change. I think that Matt earlier brought up the model portfolio and asset allocation models, and I think that will be a big part of the narrative. From a sort of portfolio theory standpoint, in terms of creating a balanced portfolio, Bitcoin is unprecedented in terms of its diversification and qualities. The math, if you follow sort of portfolio theory, it basically tells you need to do this. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that narrative plays out, and how the narrative of Bitcoin as a financial asset, store of value asset, financial asset in sort of mainstream financial channels, how that will evolve. And then yes, of course, we also look forward to Ether, and there the narrative is probably going to be a little bit different. Can't play the diversification effect narrative so much, because if you assume that people already have Bitcoin, then we're going to have to delve into some of the more core underlying fundamentals of, at least for Ethereum, the technology, smart contracts, what that means and what the potential is, what is already happening, etc., etc., etc. So I think one of the most exciting things is around not only investor education, but just wider education around what the different cryptos do, what properties they have, and what in some cases, the underlying technology can facilitate for the future.
Yeah, Nathan, this is Tom. I mean, I think that's a great response. One thing I get from both my students and from investors, when I was doing the Bitcoin Roadshow for 3IQ, there's this desire to be treasure hunters, right? What's next? What's good? Who are the competitors? Who's going to usurp Bitcoin? And so, and I followed this. I had this very similar path as well, right? I learned about Bitcoin. I expanded out beyond that. I became somewhat distracted, and then I came back to Bitcoin as like a really core asset, an important thing in this world. And no doubt that investors will follow that same path. and so this really is a gateway to all of crypto. I would expect wild swings of the tail outside of crypto. You know, ETH, Solana, going all the way down the list. I would expect wild swings, as we've seen, right? Like Bitcoin usually leads markets, alts follow, but given the learning curve of the United States investing public, not just to be exposed to this ticker symbol, but to have all of, you know, Larry Fink and Jan VanEck and have all these leaders go out and champion this asset and, you know, be in the news and get that coverage. That will be great for adoption. I think a year or two out, we're going to see those treasure hunters come out in closed-end funds and ETFs and go down the tail of crypto. And hopefully they'll come back to Bitcoin as this, you know, supreme, self-sovereign, open, permissionless asset. But I think that there's going to be a path for investors to go in and out of those altcoins in a way we've never seen before.
Matt, any final closing thoughts?
I mean, I agree with everything said there. I just reiterate, I guess, what Sui said earlier. I think from a portfolio construction perspective, these things are very powerful. Like you hear all the time that volatility is bad in a traditional asset allocation framework or in a traditional portfolio context, but like in an asset allocation framework, that just means it's highly capital efficient. And if you don't have any Bitcoin in your portfolio today, it's a low correlation asset that doesn't take a lot of it to move your portfolio a lot, given that volatility profile. So, you know, getting off zero and going to 1% is the most important thing you can do. And I think that's something that will be like an easier sell to advisors than saying like, hey, you have to put 20% of your portfolio in this for it to move the needle. Like you can materially move your Sharp on a very small allocation to these types of things. So I think it will be very interesting for advisors.
Great. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for joining today as we wait for what most people think is going to be final approval coming through sometime today. We will see, and hope to have everyone back with us again soon. And thanks to all of our listeners for stopping by.